that's exactly what our goal is. Our goal is to identify um, specific steps toward your approval for Social Security disability and an award of benefits in your case. Um, I wanted to explore some thoughts that you may not have considered before with regard to being approved for Social Security disability and winning your disability claim. Um, there are, as you may recall, or maybe you don't recall, but if not, I'll make you aware of those now. There are three basic ways to be approved for Social Security disability. Number one is the application of a grid rule. Those normally apply to people that are 50 or older. What Social Security calls technically the medical vocational guidelines, and they are in practice referred to as the grid rules. A second would be whether or not a person meets a listing. Listings are simply definitions that doctors and others have developed for the Social Security Administration over time. As a practical matter, it's pretty tough to meet a listing unless you really have good support from your doctor and good medical records to really substantiate being able to meet a listing. But number three, and this is probably one that might be new to you, and that's to work down a path so that in the end we have an RFC. Social Security is abbreviation for Residual Functional Capacity. Their kind of fancy way of saying what you can still do despite your limitations, whatever they may be they physical, mental, emotional, or a combination. And that's what I want to explore with it today. Some dynamic steps to help you take that path of finding an RFC, residual functional capacity, which is less than sedentary. Because as a practical matter, many people, especially people under age 50, and this doesn't necessarily apply just to people under age 50, but it would have significant potential results for those folks. So this will be a path that isn't necessarily always explored, and we're going to look at that in some detail. In terms of a generalized statement, a person who has a residual functional capacity that's less than sedentary has to be capable of or incapable of working in a sedentary situation. A sedentary job is one that we would normally think of as a typical office setting, for example. Social Security Administration is not necessarily looking at your qualifications to determine if you're qualified for an office type job. I'm using that to illustrate a point. And so whether or not you're qualified to do that job by education or experience or a combination is not necessarily a relative point, so to speak. Sedentary work, for example, is typically 10 pounds or less, typically less than 10 pounds. Social Security Administration always uses a gallon of milk as a point of reference because they know that a gallon of milk weighs about 8 pounds. And if a person is not able to not only lift and carry a gallon of milk or anything else that weighs 8 pounds roughly, occasionally. And Social Security Administration, of course, has definitions for all of the terms they utilize. And occasional is defined like this. It's basically from 0 to 1/3 of the workday. So it's not. It's a little more than 2 hours, but it's not 2 hours all at once. It's 2 hours spread out over the 8-hour workday. So if you're in a job where you had to not only lift but lift and carry something where you had to do that a little more than 2 hours, spread out over the 8-hour workday, then you should be found to have an RFC, residual functional capacity, of less than sedentary, which is the path that we're pursuing today, and the road that we're going down. Portions of what I'm going to be talking about today are derived from and explained in what the Social Security Administration calls SSR 96-9P. Social Security Administration has these rules and regulations that they're required to abide by. I'll be reading from some of the regulations so that I don't misquote them or mislead. But Social Security regulation that I referenced, 96-9P, points out that most sedentary jobs require the good use of both hands and the fingers. In other words, bilateral manual dexterity. And if you are having difficulty, many people are having difficulty with their hands and fingers as a result of a number of medical problems that result in swelling of the hands and fingers, and so that's a significant factor to be considered with regard to an RFC finding of less than sedentary. An additional factor would be if the individual is unable to stoop at all. A good example of stooping: assume a person's walking down the road picking up aluminum cans. They're in a stooping position. Some of the other examples that Social Security Administration utilizes in what they call the Revised Handbook for Analyzing Jobs: stoops while shoveling snow into a truck, for example. The key element to stooping, pay close attention to this phrase, is that it requires the full use of the lower extremities, and back muscles are required. It's important to note that word required as well. Social Security regulations point out that if a person is unable to stoop at all, they are definitely on the path to approval, and in many cases they should be approved. Your stooping ability may be limited by a number of factors. Many people that I work with are dealing with dizziness, vertigo. Sometimes folks are dealing with headaches, and if they bend over, that facilitates a headache or makes it much worse than it otherwise would have been. So if your medical records support, and that's the key phrase in all of Social Security disability approvals, medical records support that you're unable to support, that you're unable to have good use of both hands, you are very much on the path to approval, and in all likelihood would be approved just on those two key elements. Another major factor to consider is whether or not your doctors have advised you to elevate feet and legs while you're seated. I know that's the case with many of my clients. If you have been advised to do this, we need to make sure that we can substantiate that it's medically necessary. In other words, your doctor has to at some point in the medical records indicate that it is medically necessary for you to do this in order to get pain relief or to reduce swelling in your lower extremities, or for whatever reason would medically benefit you. It's important that we identify how high, and the standard seems to be medically that most doctors who recommend elevating the legs recommend elevating those legs above heart level. And so if you're in a position where, for example, if you had to, let's say hypothetically, elevate your legs for 10 minutes every hour above heart level, and this is medically necessary as substantiated in your records, there's a very high probability then of approval for disability benefits. Other related considerations, and by the way, I understand it's very difficult. Some doctors will be helpful, but there are many doctors who do not necessarily want to be helpful to their patients who are applying for Social Security disability. I'm not sure why, because if a person is approved for Social Security disability, they're going to have some money in their pocket, which we all know goes a long way toward any individual's well-being and mental health, and also, in all likelihood, they're going to have access to either Medicaid or Medicare, depending on circumstances. And so I suggest to my clients that in order to facilitate, if you will, the likelihood that your doctor is going to give you some sort of a written statement when you're with your doctor, nurse practitioner, or whomever it is, whomever the treating source is, just tell them, hey, it's only going to take you a couple of sentences. It's going to take you less than 3 minutes. Just pull out your prescription pad, write on your pad that I need to elevate my legs above heart level 10 minutes every hour, and sign it, hand it to me, and I'll take it from there. So if you take that approach, you've increased the probability that your treating source is actually going to give you something on the spot that substantiates that it's medically necessary for you. Along those same lines, if a person is using a cane or any other assistive device, same pattern. You need to get some substantiation from your treating source that your use of your cane is medically necessary, because, as indicated earlier, most sedentary jobs require good use of both hands, and if you need to use a cane for ambulation, walking, or balance, or both, it's greatly going to minimize your ability to utilize both hands on a what Social Security calls an occasional or a basis. The same elements of reasoning apply to a service animal. Some folks who are dealing with significant mental health limitations find great peace and great help if they are able to have a service animal with them. And if you do, same iteration. You've got to be able to show that it's medically necessary. Some of the other considerations from Social Security ruling 96-9P, and you can simply Google that. You'll find it. You'll be able to see what I'm referencing, what my source is for much of this particular discussion. You may have a sitting limitation as well, and you may need to have what is called a sit-stand option. Many of my clients actually require a sit-stand-walk option, and we usually define that as sitting for, let's say, 30 minutes, standing for 10 minutes, and then actually walking away from the workplace for about 5 minutes. So that would be 5 minutes each hour. So that means you're gonna in effect have to take extra breaks, which is going to help substantiate and illustrate that you're not able to work a full-time job. But at any rate, the walking away is for many of my clients necessary due to pain, and the walking away gives them an opportunity for a few minutes of pain relief, and helps them reduce the pain just a bit. Most sedentary jobs also require the good use of vision for near vision acuity, because most sedentary jobs, a person's going to be working with paperwork and documents, things of that sort. So if you have a limitation that prevents or limits your ability to do work of that sort, that's going to be another element toward our path to approval. If you're dealing with asthma or bronchitis, COPD, you may have environmental limitations. You may need to be in a setting where you're not exposed to fumes and things of that sort. Additionally, and jumping back to the vision limitation for a while, you would need to be able to, based on your vision, be able to avoid obstacles and other hazards in the workplace. And again, if you're not able to do that, it's another element towards our key to approval. You may also be receiving medical treatment, particularly if a person's undergoing, some people are undergoing chemotherapy and still able to work. But if you're undergoing chemotherapy and the effects of that treatment are preventing you from working in the context of what we're talking about in a job that would be less than sedentary, then that's another consideration, another key towards your approval. Related to that, if you're significantly experiencing side effects from any medications that you're taking. Folks could have all kinds of side effects, as you well know. You could have side effects that cause drowsiness. You can have side effects that interfere with your ability to get a decent night's sleep. You can have side effects that result in your fatigue and just make you feel tired all day, make you feel that you need to take a nap. And particularly people who, for example, right now, unfortunately, people who are experiencing so-called long COVID, many of those people just feel totally exhausted all day long and the entire time that they're not in bed, and it's just an awful obstacle for folks to have to deal with. If you're dealing with irritable bowel syndrome or anything that may be related to that causes frequent trips to the restroom, another element in our key to approval for you. Diarrhea, same thing would be applicable. If you're dealing with diarrhea, obviously, it's not going to be unusual, and we try not to embarrass anyone during a hearing or any kind of discussion with decision makers at the Social Security Administration. But many people do have to wear protective clothing in order to deal with problems with diarrhea and the like, and those are going to interfere with your ability to perform even a sedentary job. Many folks applying for Social Security disability are also dealing with seizures of a variety of nature. Some can be very significant seizures, and it's going to sound, what I'm about to say sounds kind of silly, but this is the way the agency looks at it. It's really the ideal situation with regard to a seizure is whether or not a medical professional, be it a nurse, a doctor, a nurse practitioner, have actually observed one of your seizures. Will go a long way toward your approval with regard to that particular element. Many of my clients are also dealing with neck problems, what the orthopedic physicians refer to as cervical problems. So if you're unable to hold your head in a flexed position, flexed forward position, in other words, the position you'd be in if you were working on a computer and looking down, say, at a 45-degree angle, and you had to do that a significant period of the day. Again, we use that term occasional, which again means a little more than 2 hours, not all at once, but spread out over that 8-hour workday. And if you're unable to do that due to problems with your neck, another significant factor on your path to our approval of showing that our theory of the claim is that your residual functional capacity is limiting you to less than sedentary work, which in turn leads you to a path of winning, a path to approval. and a path to hallelujah again. Please remember to click on the subscribe button. I have documents that I am willing to provide to anyone, but sometimes folks who are subscribers to my YouTube site are going to have access to materials that would not otherwise be readily available to them. So please do that. Please take a moment to subscribe. We will conclude on a happy note, and again, that happy note being a celebration, an hallelujah of your approval for disability benefits.